Hey, welcome to The Explainer. We're all about breaking down big, complex ideas.
So, today we're jumping into a real mystery, one of the New Testament's most profound puzzles, actually. And that's the real reason the book of Ephesians was even written. For centuries, people have been debating its true purpose.
Okay, so our mystery? It really starts with what's not there. See, most of the Apostle Paul's letters, they were written to solve very specific problems in very specific churches. We're talking false teachings, internal squabbles, you name it. But Ephesians? Yeah, it's different.
I mean, there's no obvious crisis, no big heresy that Paul is trying to stamp out. And this lack of a clear target has left scholars scratching their heads for ages, asking, okay, if it wasn't written to fix a problem, then what was it for? Well, one really popular and honestly fascinating theory comes from a scholar named Clinton Arnold. And he argues the answer isn't in what you can see, but in the unseen world, the world of ancient magic. You gotta remember, back in the first century world, especially in places like, say, modern-day Turkey, life was lived with this constant awareness, and frankly, a fear, of a spiritual realm. People genuinely believed that powerful, invisible beings could mess with their lives. And magic? Magic was like the toolkit you used to try and control those forces, either for your own benefit or just for protection. So Arnold connects the dots here. He points out that the book of Ephesians is just filled with what he calls power language, all this talk of rulers, authorities, and powers. And his argument is that these aren't political terms. Nope. He says they're references to the spiritual beings from that magical worldview. So the whole point of the letter? To tell new Christians, hey, you don't need to be afraid of these beings, you don't need to use spells, because Jesus is way more powerful than all of them combined. And that's a pretty compelling theory, right? It makes sense of the language. But there's a problem. A huge one, actually. There's a key clue hidden in the oldest copies of this letter that it changes the entire picture. Get this. The oldest and best ancient manuscripts that we have of Ephesians, they're missing two key words, in Ephesus. That's right. The letter we all call Ephesians probably didn't even say in Ephesus in its opening sentence. Now, just stop and think about what that means for a second. If the letter wasn't written specifically to the church in Ephesus, then a whole theory built around a specific local problem, like magic in that city, well, it suddenly starts to look a lot less certain, doesn't it? Yeah, this wasn't some private message to one church. The evidence strongly suggests it was more like a circular letter, something meant to be passed around and read by a whole bunch of different churches in the area. And that points us away from a small local issue and toward a much, much bigger, more universal purpose. Okay, so with the magic theory on shaky ground, we can start to explore a different solution to this whole mystery. And this one, it's not rooted in local superstition at all. Instead, it's anchored in the grand, sweeping story of the Old Testament. And this really highlights a major shift in how we think about this. The debate isn't just about the letter's purpose anymore. It's about its very source code. Where is Paul getting his ideas? Is he just reacting to local pagan magic, or is he drawing deep from his own scriptural well, the Old Testament, to explain something absolutely massive about the entire universe? And boom, here it is. This is the heart of the new theory. According to scholars like Dr. Dave Mathewson, the main point of the entire letter is laid out right here in the first chapter. Paul is pulling back the curtain on God's ultimate plan, which is to reconcile, to gather up, to bring everything in the whole cosmos, heaven, earth, the spiritual, the physical, all of it together under the leadership of Christ. So that brings up a good question. If those rulers and authorities aren't magical spirits, who are they? Well, it turns out Paul is pulling his language straight from the Old Testament. When he talks about Christ being seated at the right hand, he's not making that up. He's directly quoting texts like Psalm 110, which is all about God's chosen king ruling over all his enemies. And he does it again with Psalm 8, pointing out that the Old Testament itself prophesied this cosmic ruler who would have authority over everything. And then Paul just comes right out and says it. That promised ruler is Jesus. And the enemies under his feet, Paul's saying it's not just earthly empires, but the hostile spiritual powers that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. This brings us to a really key idea for understanding Paul and, frankly, a lot of the New Testament. It's this concept of the already but not yet. Here's the deal. The idea is that Christ has already won the decisive cosmic victory. The spiritual powers of evil have been defeated. That's the already. But,
and this is a big but, we don't yet see the full effects of that victory here on Earth. I mean, just look around, right? The world is still a messy place. But the point is, the ultimate outcome is totally secure. So you might be asking, okay, where's the proof? Where do we see this victory? And Paul's answer is, look at the church. This brand new community, made up of people who used to be mortal enemies, Jews and Gentiles, but are now united as one family. That is the first piece of earthly evidence that God's cosmic reconciliation plan is actually happening. The very existence of the church is like a living, breathing announcement to those defeated spiritual powers that their game is over. And all of this brings us to probably the most famous part of the whole letter, the armor of God. Now, this isn't just some random topic he throws in at the end. No way. It's the perfect, practical conclusion to this whole cosmic story he's been telling.
You know, a lot of us have this picture in our heads of Paul chained up in a prison, looking over at a Roman guard and thinking, hey, that's a good idea for a metaphor. And sure, he definitely knew what a soldier looked like, but the real source for his imagery is way older and way deeper. He's going back to the well. He's drawing once again from the Old Testament.
That breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, that's not from some Roman centurion's uniform. Paul is literally quoting the prophet Isaiah, who describes God himself putting on this armor to go defeat his enemies. I mean, the implication here is just staggering. Paul is telling regular Christians that they are called to put on the very armor of God. And notice, this armor isn't about physical weapons. It's not about spears and swords. It's made of things like truth, righteousness, peace, and faith. So spiritual warfare, in Paul's mind, isn't about chanting incantations or fighting mystical battles in the sky. It's about the nitty-gritty of living out the virtues of a reconciled life, right here in the middle of a broken world. See, this whole last chapter isn't a new topic at all. It's the powerful conclusion that ties everything together. It's basically Paul's way of saying, okay, if you really get that Christ has started to put the entire universe back together, then this is what it looks like to live as a citizen of that new reality. And that's really where this ancient letter leaves us today. The secret of Ephesians, it turns out, isn't really about dodging magic spells. It's this breathtaking, grand vision of the entire universe being healed and put back together. And it leaves us with a really challenging question. If the church, if we are supposed to be the first sign of that cosmic peace, what in the world does that mean for how we live our lives, right here and right now?